Hello, everyone. Welcome to Talks at Google. I'm Deepthi, and I work for the Devices and Services group here at Google. Today, it is my privilege to host Roger Martin, who's here to talk about his new book, When More Is Not Better: Overcoming America's Obsession with Economic Efficiency. In his book, Roger talks about how the relentless pursuit of economic efficiency is making our economy more fragile and putting American democratic capitalism in danger. Roger is Professor Emeritus and former Dean of the Rotman School of Management at University of Toronto. He was named Global Dean of the Year in 2013. Roger is also a trusted strategy advisor to the CEOs of many global firms. And in 2017, he was named the world's #1 management thinker by Thinkers 50. So welcome, Roger. Thanks for taking the time to come talk to us today.
Hey, it's my total pleasure, Deepthi. It's great to be back at Google, virtually this time. Last time I did a talk like that, it was at your headquarters, but I'm delighted to be back.
Oh, great. So you're no stranger to Google.
No, not at all. Not at all. I think this is my third Google talk. I think I did one for Playing to Win in 2013, and I think I did one for Creating Great Choices a couple of years ago.
Great. Welcome again.
Thank you.
So, Roger, I'm an economics graduate, and economics is a subject that is of deep interest to me. So when I heard about this book, I really couldn't wait to get my hands on it, and I immediately jumped on the opportunity to host your talk. So, well, I finished reading the book recently, and I must say I really enjoyed it. I really love the keen economic insight and practical advice that you offer in the book. And what I particularly enjoyed the most were your engaging anecdotes that I really thought brought, all of those great concepts and ideas in your book to life. And also, I'd like to tell everyone that you don't have to be an economics major or an economist to enjoy this book. Roger has explained the concepts and analysis so clearly and simply, in my opinion, that I feel anybody who reads this book will surely find it insightful, thought-provoking, and engaging. So,
well, thank you. You made my day, Deepthi, because that's the intention of my writing. I'm trained as an economist as well, but my intention in writing everything I write is it has to meet the standard that somebody, a smart person, but who's not taken a single course in economics, can kind of understand and follow along. So I'm glad you feel that I've achieved it in this book.
Absolutely. So without further ado, Roger, I will dive right into asking you a few questions.
Sure.
But before I ask you my first question, just a note to the audience about the format of the talk. I will be interviewing Roger and asking him questions for the first 30 to 40 minutes. And then we will open it up to you all, to the audience, for Q&A. All right. So with that, Roger, my first question to you is that I feel some might call you one of the capitalism's insiders, given that you're a former business school dean and strategic advisor to the CEOs. What compelled you to tackle this topic?
Well, you're right in the sense that I'm both maybe a capitalist insider and I love capitalism, but even more, I love I think the wonderful combination of capitalism and democracy, because I think it's the best system the world has yet come up with to sort of manage an economy, right? It uses private ownership of most assets to create the goods and services that we all enjoy and make our lives better. And the system of governing that is one of the people. A majority needs to vote for the continuation of that system. And so I really care about that combination because there are many other combinations. And one combination right now that, that I think has me worried at least is totalitarian capitalism, right? And that's China, right? And people may object to that characterization, but it is. It's a one party state with no even hint of the idea of democracy, and it's turned increasingly capitalist, and it's doing well. And so, for me, Democratic capitalism has got to win in some sense for it to perpetuate as the system we believe in America and many other developed countries around the world.
Right. So you talk in your book about how our obsession with economic inefficiency has driven inequality in America. How so?
Well, it turns out that if you take a system that generally produces sort of more normally distributed results, which we sort of count on. This is one of the things that in the book I argue we implicitly assume that the result of pursuing democratic capitalism will be a substantially normally shaped distribution of outcomes. That's manifested in the large middle class, right? That bulge in the middle of the bell, with smaller tails of poorer families and richer families. And in the evolved state of democratic capitalism, it's you tax the richer tail to a greater extent to help make the lives of the poorer tail better off, and hopefully produce in them the chances of greater mobility by providing, education and other support. So that's sort of how the system works. But it turns out that what we've learned through the study of complexity theory is that if you put increasing amounts of pressure on that bell-shaped system, right, it can turn into a different distribution. Rather than a bell-shaped, it's the ski slope of a Pareto distribution, right? And this is Wilfredo Pareto, who in the late 18th or 19th century, right before the turn of the 20th century, observed in Italy that 20% of the families owned 80% of the land. That's where we get the 80-20 rule from. As you know, economists and statisticians will also refer to it as the power law. But what's happened is we've used efficiency, an obsessive pursuit of efficiency, to put more pressure on institutions, business, careers, etc., more and more pressure, and that has changed the distribution of our outcomes away from a more bell-shaped distribution of economic outcomes to a Pareto-shaped distribution. And that's why, even though we've had very healthy economic growth, average economic growth, mean economic growth, GDP per capita over the last 40 years, we've had really, really weak median income growth. Why? It's because in this economy, more and more and more of the returns to economic growth are going to the tail that's way out there in the long tail of a Pareto distribution, while everybody else is just sort of staying stagnant.
Great. So, you talked about pressure on the system being one of the factors that have probably led for this shape to change from a normal distribution to what you described as the Pareto distribution now. There's one other factor that you talk about in your book, which is about connectedness.
Yes.
And, the role of globalization and technology in creating this Pareto distribution. Though, you do mention that, they are contributing factors that have intensified the shift, but they are not all in and of themselves the reasons, why.
Yes, no, you're right. There's two factors that together will turn a normal distribution towards the Pareto. One is increasing level of pressure and decreasing cost of connection. And so, for people who are junkies of this sort of thing, people talk. The complexity theorists talk about the sand pile quite often, right? A sand pile, as a sand pile, you keep adding one grain of sand, and it looks like a sand pile, kind of normally distributed looking sand pile. You add grains of sand one at a time, and they have almost no impact, and then suddenly they have this vast impact. And so and the sand pile completely collapses. Now, if you took that sand pile and put it in a zero gravity state, right, with no pressure, so when the sand hits it, there's no pressure on it, it would never happen, right? If each sand grain of sand was independently structured in its own little superstructure, so it wasn't connected to the others in intricate ways in the sand pile, it also wouldn't collapse. And so essentially, when you connect things together, right? And of course, the internet connects things together. I use as an example fame. It used to be hard to say who's more famous, that soccer player or that movie star or that songwriter or that political figure. And you actually couldn't figure that out because they each had their own following. It was their each own domain. Now, what's the yardstick? Instagram followers, right?
Right.
You know, and so we now have connected all sorts of domains of fame, and so fame has become Pareto distributed.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah.
You know, I loved your example with regards to the Instagram followers. So, you know, you mentioned the example of the celebrity turned cosmetics mogul Kylie Jenner,
Yes.
whose followers the advertisers seem to love, and she earns $1 million per sponsored post. And to put that in perspective, you write in your book, in a single post, Jenner makes 1% of the lifetime wealth of Cindy Crawford, you know, back from the 1980s.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you know, that's
Or
the
Frank
power of
Sinatra.
technology, right?
Yes.
And the extent of
Yes.
skewness that it can cause.
Exactly. It's skewing to that long tail. And again, I don't, Deepta, have some sort of philosophical opposition to talent earning a return on it. The problem is if there's not enough left for the median family, then that undermines the very democracy that these folks work in. And it's not clear to me, right, that they could be doing the sorts of things they're doing in a totalitarian system.
Sure.
Right? Now, it's possible they could be Tencent and they could be Alibaba, you know, doing just fine. But I don't think many of the equivalent, you know, tech people in Silicon Valley would give up their citizenship in exchange for Chinese citizenship if it was permanent. That's it. You know, you're never going to be an American again. You know, so I think, and interestingly enough, for what it's worth, I think a bunch of them would be more sanguine about giving up it for Indian citizenship because it's a democracy. Right.
Right.
I think it fundamentally matters to people that we have this combination. And what having that combination means, I believe, is that median family, which I sort of equate with the median voter, like or the swing voter, right? Because we've got to get 51%. So we've got to get that median family to vote for you. Now, of course, it won't necessarily be that family, but it's the families in that band around it. Let's say 10% on either side, the middle quintile. If the middle quintile of the income distribution doesn't think this is working for me, right, then I think you're going to have that capitalist system under extreme pressure democratically. And for 200 years in America, that median family could be quite confident, over 90% confident in terms of the years, that they would move ahead economically, right?
Right.
There was the long depression in the late 1800s. There was, of course, the Great Depression. There was 75, 76, 81, 82. These few years where, no, it didn't happen. You moved backwards, but
right.
pretty quickly reestablished that forward motion. And, you know, from the time we started measuring median income in a consistent way, median family income, through to 1976, it was moving ahead smartly at 2.4% real compound annual. Why is that important? It's important because that means a doubling in family income in one generation. So a father, a mother could be thinking, a median, as somebody living right at the median in year X, could think, my children will be twice as well off as I am in real terms, in real dollar terms, right? Way better in nominal terms, but twice as well off And they wouldn't be delusional. They would be kind of factual. That's the greatest likelihood. From 76 to the present, that rate has dropped so much so to 0.6% per year, so that it takes 100 years to double. 100 years. Think about it, Deepti. That's 3 1/3 generations, or
That's
4
right.
generations, depending on how you want to measure it. So you got to be thinking like that family that was thinking pre-76.
Right.
My children will have double. They'll say, my children won't. Their children won't. Their children won't quite. But the next generation, probably 4 generations down, will. How many people are just game to wait for that?
Right.
And game to say, we are going to stick assiduously with this system because this system really works for me. I think that's what's lost. And quite frankly, when I started this project that ended up with this book was 2013. There were no Bernie bros. There weren't, kind of young people, 40% in favor of trying socialism, right? But what I was worried about then has continued to get people, I think, feeling less sanguine about democratic capitalism.
Right. And, you've mentioned some of these points here, but I'd like to quote you from your book on, why this has become so important, especially in the light of the fact that, the distribution, as we mentioned, is moving from normal to Pareto. So you mentioned that if 51% or more citizens experience stagnation rather than growth, they will at some point defect from capitalism. Now, if it was a normal distribution, one occurrence is independent of the other, right? Yeah. So it'll only probably make the distribution more stable. Yes. But economic outcomes are not independent, right? Effects are causes of more of the same effects. And that transforms, this normal distribution more into the Pareto distribution.
Yeah, and you've put your finger on something that I would just encourage the listeners to use as a bit of a benchmark, right? If in the system you're operating in or observing, effects become the cause of more of that effect, you have an unstable system, right? And so Instagram is a wonderful example. So what causes you to follow somebody on Instagram, right? One of the key things that attracts people to somebody on Instagram is how many followers they have, right? Yes. If somebody's got 2 followers, Deepti, are you going to say, oh, wow, I ought to follow that person? No, because you're going to say, well, nobody else thinks so. And so I'm not going to waste my time watching them on Instagram for a while and figuring out that's why nobody wants to watch them. I will go and see who's got 1 million followers. Mm-hmm. And so having 1 million followers is an effect that causes more of that effect. And that's why the median person on Instagram has between 100 and 150 followers. Right?
That's right.
And last time I checked, Cristiano Ronaldo had 216 million. All right. 1 million times more. And that's because it's one of these systems in which effects powerfully cause more of that given effect. And those distributions, unlike normal distributions, where the central limit theorem says they'll get more and more normal over time, they are unstable. They are completely unstable over time and are likely to get, if you will, more extremely distributed than they started out.
Right. So in your book, Roger, you also write that the proxies we use to measure efficiency lead to destructive outcomes when those proxies become surrogates. Yeah. Can you explain this in more detail?
Yeah. So there's a way we operate in life. We always have to have a model for doing something. How do I get ahead in life? I work hard, I get an education. That's a model, right? Does that actually equal and produce for sure getting ahead? No, but it's not a bad model. And then we have proxies to measure things. Did I get into a good school? Am I getting good grades? Am I kind of working this many hours a night on my homework before I go play video games or go out for a beer with my friends? You develop proxies for them, because you need some way of measuring. If you can't measure the model at work, you'll not know if you're going to get your outcome. But what often happens is we forget that the model is not the thing, right? It's a model for the thing, and then the proxies are not the model exactly. They're one way of measuring the model. And that's what we've done with efficiency. So we've said, we need to be more efficient to be more competitive. And so we're going to measure efficiency with things like, well, how far down can we push labor costs? Can we get labor costs down this much further? Procurement costs. In capital markets, it's bid-ask spreads, right? And these are, and in international trade, it's how low are the tariffs. All of these things are viewed as equaling efficiency, when no, they're a measure of efficiency that has some pluses and some minuses, right? So you may say, yeah, labor costs, let's get labor costs down even more. Why are we paying $15 an hour when we can pay $12 an hour? And if somebody believes that that's efficiency, but doesn't take into account, for example, what was customer service like at 15 versus 12? Or in the Costco example I gave, what does efficiency look like at 22? Well, what it looks like is you pay $22 an hour, which is about what they pay for their store floor workers. Minimum wage is irrelevant to them because they pay almost double minimum wage in many of their jurisdictions. But they have a more sophisticated measure of efficiency. It's a more holistic measure. It's like what's efficient is what brings lots of customers into the store who fill up their basket with a stack of our goods, so that they go out of the store earning us a huge gross margin on that huge basket of goods, because they were helped by people who really wanted to serve them and loved the environment. And so for them, it's a more sophisticated measure of efficiency. They are arguably among kind of retailers, among the most, if not the most efficient retailer in producing profit dollars and producing customers. But it was not by following the efficiency measures that most of their competitors do, which is get floor staffing down to the minimum level necessary to serve the customers, and pay them as little as you possibly can, and that will make you efficient. Well, it won't. If customers don't show up and buy anything, then it's sort of a hollow kind of efficiency. So it's those narrow kind of proxies that aren't measuring more holistically what you're trying to accomplish. So remember, you're trying to accomplish something. You have a model, and you have a proxy, and I call that the chain of imperfection. Right, and you've got to worry about how far from what you're trying to accomplish is it to your proxies. Right. And the answer in the modern economy is a lot of times it's a long and twisted journey.
Right. The example in your book that stuck with me the most, and to which you alluded to as well, was from procurement, which is my area of job expertise and what I do at Google. Yes. And you very correctly mentioned that considering the lower cost of manufacturing inputs as a surrogate for efficient procurement can be very misleading, and it can actually lead to desired outcomes. And I've actually seen that happen in practice. Cost cannot be the only driver. You have to look at other factors like supply continuity or willingness of the supplier to invest. Yeah, and that I don't know. Again, it's your area of expertise, but I suspect that at the time that is more complicated and more work to do it. So if you were into I want to get my job done as fast as possible so I can go play squash or something, you might use a simpler proxy. But if instead you say, no, I don't want to fall prey to that,
you're going to have to work a little bit harder on saying, well, how do I think about the trade-off between this, and could I figure out a clever way to get both? It'll take a little more gray matter, a little more elbow grease, but it's not. I'd ask you, it's not undoable. You can be cleverer.
I think for us, it's required a mindset change and the realization that we are all dependent on each other to maximize the benefits, right? So gone are the days when I could dictate the relationship. It just has to be balanced. It has to work out for both parties.
Yes.
And interdependencies are extremely important.
And that's why, as you know in the book, I say business and the economy are much more like a natural system than they are a machine.
That's right.
You could, if you thought it was a machine, right, everything you just said would be false, right? There are independencies where we both succeed in that. No, we just make the machine run faster. But if instead, by pushing this way with suppliers, the suppliers decide we're going to supply somebody else other than Google. We're going to give them our best thinking. We're going to give them our newest ideas. We'll co-invest more with those people because we don't like what these folks are doing to us. That's adaptation. And this is one of the reasons, why the complexity theorists, stress so much it's a complex adaptive system. It doesn't just keep looking the way it looks. It adapts on a continuous basis to what's happening in the system, what incentives, what impacts, what other entities are doing. And that's where I think sort of naive procurement departments didn't think about adaptation, and I think a bunch of them have gotten into trouble by doing that. Same with naive hiring functions, which is let's get a whole bunch of people to apply for this and find out who's willing to work for the least.
Absolutely. And I know you mentioned about complex adaptive systems. So you do mention in your book that the economy should not be just viewed as a sum of parts. It's not just a sum of parts, right? And that the relationship between the inputs and the outputs are non-linear. And, you talk about the butterfly effect, actually, to very nicely explain that. And also, the example about the 2008 and 2009 financial crisis. It's been 12 years, but that is still very fresh in my mind because I remember I was graduating from business school at the time, and some of us really had to bear the brunt of it, in terms of the job market tanking. But you do take that 2008 financial or 2009 global financial crisis, and you explain that bursting of the housing bubble was what triggered that global financial crisis. But if the economy were like a machine, where each subsystem operated independently, then we would have all been protected, from the downside of the housing crisis. But the reality
has just been over there.
Exactly, right. So, and then I think you also take that example to explain how the input-output relationship is non-linear because the economists couldn't see this crisis coming. They couldn't predict it in as many as 49 countries, perhaps because, what they were attempting to forecast was simply not forecastable using the modeling techniques that assume that linear relationship.
Yes.
And
similar. I just was talking to yesterday to a guy I know I used to work with, who's pointed out that there was a huge study, and now I'm forgetting who did it. A huge study of the risk factors in the global economy, and they listed like the 50 top kind of risk factors, and this was January 15th, 2020. And you know what pandemic ranked? 47th. So right, it had already started in China,
right?
And it still didn't make their top 35 or 40. It was right near the bottom. So it's just now and I think you can back me up on this. I didn't say those economists were idiots. I just said they're outmatched. Right? They're just outmatched, just like these risk experts. It is just you cannot ever be confident that you have figured out what's coming next in the economy. And now, does that mean you have to turtle and say, oh, I can't think about anything or do anything? No, you just have to be careful with the level of confidence you have in what you're doing. And again, does that mean don't do things, don't make big bets? No, sometimes you got to bet $10 billion on something to have a chance of it succeeding. But if the kind of life of your company, the continuity of your company depends on it, then I'd say you ought to think twice about, is there a way to spend $1 billion to figure out quickly whether the other $9 billion is a good idea or a bad idea, right? It's to tweak, figure out how to tweak, and keep tweaking and tweaking and making it better. Because the minute you get super confident that you are right, I mean, I think you're just cruising for a bruising. You're going to be wrong, and the smartest medical people didn't see this coming. The smartest financial people and economists didn't see 2008 9 coming, and then we spend our time trying to worry about the next housing bubble that's going to create it's not going to be a housing bubble. It's going to be something else. Yeah. And who the heck knows what that is?
Yeah. So I know we have maybe about 7 minutes before we turn to the audience. So maybe we have time for a couple of questions more. So,
sure.
So Roger, you talk about the importance of maintaining the balance between efficiency and resiliency in your book.
Yes.
And you mentioned that all 4 groups of actors, namely business executives, political leaders, educators, and citizens, need to work together to make a difference towards making the economy more resilient. You offer, very concrete suggestions, a lot of practical advice on how to do that. So can you talk to us a little bit about that? And
sure.
In my opinion, if you can focus on the citizens first. Given the election
sure.
time, I believe the discussion is very topical, and then followed by business executives, because I just feel that's, another group that touches our lives pretty closely. So
sure. And I'll try and be quick, and maybe we can even do one for each category. But citizens, I guess the main thing I would say to citizens is just recognize that you can use your purchasing power for the benefit of the future of democratic capitalism or not. And a couple ways you can use it is to multi-home is one. Is when you fall in love with a provider of either a good or a service and start giving it 100% of your purchases, Amazon Prime, for example, you are helping to create a Pareto distribution, because lots of other people will, and the effect, you doing that, is the cause of more of that effect, making the company stronger. And you'd just be better off for the future of democratic capitalism if you like Amazon Prime to buy 50% of your stuff or 60% of your stuff on that, and go to your local store, buy from other online retailers, go to the big nationwide chains. Just don't follow the Pareto distribution in your own behavior, and to a greater extent, reward the companies that are doing well by the world. So I do see a positive trend where consumers are asking, do I want to buy from this company? Are they a good company? Are they good for the planet? That has more impact than people, I think, really realize it. So I would say that for citizens, use your purchasing power to help create the world that you want, not the world that we're getting. Business executives, I'd say a couple things. One is just recognize that the elimination of all slack should not be a goal. I think we've gotten into this view that we must drive out all waste. It just turns out that it's hard to separate waste from stuff that's really important, right? We drove out wasted extra emergency room nurses in the years leading up to spring of 2020. to make sure our staffing was super tight and we got rid of the waste of nurses hanging around not working their entire shift. Were they really waste? I think the answer now is pretty definitively no, they weren't. They were important slack. They were an important buffer against upticks. Same with PPE. So think more carefully and holistically about it. Think the way Edward Demings did, the great quality guru who really changed our views of quality. He'd be rolling over in his grave right now if he understood how he was being interpreted. He said that you should get rid of kind of really, truly useless waste, have a higher quality system, right? Don't have entire warehouses full of work in process inventory. But he also said a certain amount of slack is absolutely important, right? The optimal level of slack is not zero. He was crystal clear on that. We've taken him, practically to be that no, Deming said it was zero. Well, it wasn't. And so keep that. And then the other thing has to do back to that models and proxies. Because of this problem of surrogation, I think my executives would be very wise to always be pursuing multiple goals. So I like Southwest Airlines. They want to be the lowest cost, highest employee satisfaction, highest customer satisfaction, and most profitable airline in America, which they are, all of those four. That's right. And you say, how can you do that? You can't be lowest cost and highest employee satisfaction. You got to keep wages way down. But if you say that you need to do those two things, it forces you to be more clever. And that's what Southwest was. They said, okay, so how could you have low labor costs without low wages? Figure out a system for having fewer labor hours per passenger seat mile. So how's about this? How's about we pay them the most, which they do? Mm-hmm. How's about we pay them the most, but we have a deal with them that says, in order to do that, you have to be more flexible. You can't just say, I'm going to do only one job. We're going to need you to show some flexibility. We're going to fix things so that you don't have a bunch of really time wasting things to do. We're going to fly point to point. We're going to have one kind of jet, so it's easier to clean, load, unload, train on, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the other thing I would say is it'll force you to be more clever. It's easy to pursue one goal, but when you pursue one goal, that goal ends up becoming the thing. And then you do all sorts of horrible things like Wells Fargo, right? You say, a proxy for having good, deep and fulfilling customer relationships is the number of accounts per customer. Then accounts per customer becomes the thing. Right. And so employees start opening accounts that we didn't want and destroying the company because it had one goal it was aiming at. Easier to organize around, just like for you, DP, yep. Lowest cost of procurement, all else being equal, easiest, not best. And that's what I'd say for corporate executives. So those would be for citizens and corporate executives.
Awesome. If I may add, one thing that personally really stood out for me as a citizen was not being passive. And yes. I have to say, I am guilty of being passive towards anything that has to do with politics or interaction with political leaders. Yep. But after reading your book, I really feel that that's really hurting the interests of the citizens. And it's important that, you can take a small step. It doesn't have to be a large, big effort, but take small steps and, be more active in in this area. So
I agree, and Deepti, this was one of the big, as you know from reading the book, this is one of the big learnings of our Persona Projects study of you are not alone. There are many Americans who say, I know I should, but it's hard to figure out where to start. And every time I do actually make a little start, I get completely frustrated. And so, right. I think getting back to at the Rotman School, I know you did your MBA too. At the Rotman School, one of our most popular second-year courses for students was by this guy who'd actually he had first a career as a super successful entrepreneur, sold company for a couple $100 million. Then he ended up working for government for like 20 years. And then he came to be a professor. And he taught this course about the nuts and bolts of how legislation happens, right, from start to finish. And it was really like, you'd have argued that how could this be such a popular course? It was like gruesomely kind of detailed march through, but all the students were saying, oh, so that's how it actually happens. It goes to this and into this committee, and this is where you can influence and everything. But it was an indication to me that people really long to have the insights onto how the hell all of that stuff works. Because otherwise they sit back and just say, I wish it worked better, and I don't know what to do. Do I spend my time and energy and money here or here? So I empathize with you, and I think it's a tough thing to figure out. But what you're right is take small steps. A lot of the book is take small steps, figure out a direction, take small steps, adjust as you go, and you can make a disproportionate difference. Right.
Make sure you go vote.
Yes, that is a good start. The voting record of Americans, is just horrible. Now, and I shouldn't say that. It's horrible in Europe too, actually. France and other countries, developed country voting, the percentage of people voting is a sad thing. So vote. I agree.
All right. So with that, Roger, we're going to turn to the audience. I see a lot of questions here. So the first question is from Rudy. The claim that the median family could expect 2x growth each generation, I presume initially applied only to white males. Has democratic capitalism ever or will it ever fulfill this promise for all?
Well, it's a good question. We don't have enough good data on that to know definitively an answer to your question. That having been said, it is clear as a bell that African Americans, even in that period, we're doing much worse. And the good news, though, for the period leading up to 76 was the 50s and 60s were the greatest decades for mobility. So that in those years, the likelihood of you ending up in the same quintile as you started in were the lowest on record, and so there are clearly challenges, kind of no question on that. But if the question is, am I confident we can get to that? I am, actually. I honestly believe that we can get to a point where each ethnic group, racial group can proceed. It will take a while, just as it's taken with women, a while to close the gap, right? But the question was 2.4% growth. I think there's an opportunity to have, let's say, African Americans grow at faster rate than average, so as to close the gap. But it will take managing the economy in a different way than we have been.
Cool. So there's a really great question from Mark. How do you think about the quantification of this efficiency? In particular, how do we hone in on the right amount before things go bad? Example, why is now the time to change versus 40 years ago or in another 40 years?
Yeah. I think it is both a good and tough question. What I would say is that this what happened is we just adopted a dogma that said more is always better, right? And that's what got us in this trouble. Somewhere between the mid 70s and the 80s or 90s, it started, in my view, to turn south. So up till then, efficiency, the pursuit of efficiency, had been producing this high growth in the median income and a bunch of other things, and it's just started to trend off. So one thing I would say is just getting out of our heads, more is always better, would be very important. So we should be asking, is what we're trying to do here to increase efficiency, can we make an argument that's a more holistic argument that says it still is worth pursuing, and then let's do it. Now, I do think we have to come up with better measurements, but there's also where I'd say, are we looking at the holistic, adaptive implications of using this measurement of efficiency? So if we say, I think this is going to make us more efficient, and here's how I'm measuring it, then you need to ask yourself the question, what's the implication of that measurement? So if it is, I want to lower hourly wage rates, say, well, what are the implications of that? Is that really the efficiency you want, or is the efficiency you want, as with Southwest, labor costs per passenger seat mile, not labor costs per hour of the employee? So to step back and ask the more sophisticated question about how you're measuring efficiency. That would be the closest I can get it, but I can't say here are the 5 measurements I'd want to use, because I think each situation will require a different way of measuring.
So next we have an interesting question from one of our organizers here at Talks at Google. So he asks, you mentioned pre-76 growth of 2.4% annually. However, we were on a gold or silver standard, and therefore we had a yardstick to measure money. Since our abandonment of those standards, do you think this has added unseen pressure on labor and American capitalism?
Yeah, well, when Nixon closed the gold window in August of 1971, he certainly did change the global economic system, and I think it did make things harder. I mean, business loves predictability kind of more than almost anything else, the ability to sort of plan for things. And when currencies started floating and you didn't know if you had developed a nice export market to the UK, but the pound was depreciating and you're getting less for your goods than you were before, or appreciating, whatever, it's added a level of complexity. That having been said, if it were 2.4% nominal to 0.6% nominal, I think the argument this person is making would be stronger, which is like, no, those growth rates mean a different thing. But these are kind of real growth rates, sort of take the inflationary effect of going off the gold standard out. I mean, it is an interesting question to ask whether we could have maintained the gold standard, right? Was Nixon right when the French started showing up and asking for with $35 and asking for an ounce of gold, and there was a run on Fort Knox? Was there any real choice? And there probably was. And the one thing that made it a favorable choice is it allowed printing of money and deficit spending, and that makes politicians happy to be able to figure out how to spend more money. So maybe it was inevitable that economists would take, or that politicians would take the shackles off that actually the gold standard kept on them. But as deeply you would know from being trained in economics, you can get 1,000 economists to have 1,000 different opinions on
That's right.
on the gold standard.
Absolutely. So the next question is from Zarek. If democratic capitalism allows for a scenario where more wealth goes to higher earners and there's been stagnation for the middle class, is more capitalism really the solution for its own loophole?
Well, I mean, I guess the question to me just comes down to how long will the electorate put up with this, right? That's the fundamental question, and And I would argue that we've had a couple of signals that the electorate is getting kind of itchy. And I think Brexit is one example, where to a great extent the Brexit vote was a blow it up vote. Now, this is probably an apocryphal story that the Google people can say is not true, but what I've heard it repeated enough times, and it makes for a good story, that the #1 search term on Google the morning after Brexit in the UK was "What is the EU?" And if that is in fact true, then it was a blow it up. We don't know what it is, but I don't think we like it, and it doesn't seem to be working for us. So let's blow it up. And apparently, many Trump voters who were polled after, and I'm apolitical, I'm not going to go one way or another, but many Trump voters who were polled after and said, do you really think he's going to bring back coal jobs and whatever? And they said no, but we just wanted to blow it up. So we wanted to, or drain the swamp, blow it up. So what I see happening is we're getting more generalized. I'm not convinced that the system is working for me narrative happening. And I think that's why the rise in young people saying, hey, socialism wouldn't be, why not give it a whirl? Kind of that kind of attitude. That's all heading in the direction, I think, of if capitalism is going to produce more tail of the distribution riches and median stagnation, it will create its own demise. It will not be self-correcting. I wish it were self-correcting, but I do not believe it is.
Great. The next question is from James. What role does scale play? The scale of a company, the scale of an economy, country, that makes it harder to achieve what you've described as companies or countries become larger and larger.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's one of the things that is going to be, an interesting question. It's clear that something like 74% of U.S. industries are consolidating into fewer players. The Herfindahl index is going up. The measurement economists use on concentration, and so it's interesting to me. I can't say that I kind of can say with confidence I know for sure what's going on, but clearly that's been an outcome of this economy, right? And the question is does that become a cycle where being bigger and having more scale working for you becomes the cause of more of that effect of being bigger still, and we will not have competition the way we've normally thought, which is there are a bunch of players and they're serving, and there's some more successful ones, some less successful ones, and some in the middle, and that's what an industry looks like. Well, what's going to happen if we get this effects being the cause of more effects, and an industry is one provider, right? In the other extreme, right? That each industry consolidates to one provider. Well, kind of what impacts will that have on the economy? I don't think there'll be good ones. Now, the father of strategy. So the father of strategy is, as you may or may not know, Bruce Henderson, who was the founder of Boston Consulting Group. And he really was the first person to say, to say there are a general set of rules by which business works, and that created the entire strategy consulting industry. McKinsey followed BCG, even though they've been around since 1920. BCG in 1963 created the industry, and Bruce Henderson had an interesting point of view. His point of view was that all industries are headed towards monopoly. But he wasn't super worried about it, because he said what happens is as you head to monopoly, competitors do not take you on head to head. They take you on around the fringes, because by being a monopoly, you organize yourself to serve the middle of the market, right? And you create as big a circle as you can from the middle of the market out. But on the fringes of those circles are players who serve the companies or the customers that you can't serve so well. And so they dynamically segment away chunks of your market. So every market that we understand as a market as heading towards monopoly, but then it segments into many markets, and that often creates the demise of that monopolist in the middle because they have a cost structure that's designed to serve the whole circle, and when pieces of it get cut out of the edges, their economics collapse, and so you have this sort of creative destruction going on. So Bruce Henderson might be right that don't worry so much about it because dynamic segmentation will take care of itself. There's some truth to that, but there's also this causes being the effect, or effects being the causes of more of the effects thing that goes against it. Who knows who will win? Yeah.
So Roger, in your book, you also talk about monopolization, and there was an interesting example that I think was a lesson for you from your father, who owned a firm, and he and let me see if I can get this right. I think what he said was, it's very important to have competitors and to actually steer away from a situation of being in a monopoly, because if you are the monopolist, then at first it may seem that would be very beneficial for you economically, but then eventually you tend to get complacent, and you're no longer on your toes to just make sure you're doing all the right things, and that might ultimately lead to the demise of that firm, right? So
yeah, I know this is a contrarian view. Yeah, this is a contrarian view, but it would be a view that I'd say Google should pay attention to, right? Which is, I think, and maybe because I was an athlete growing up, an obsessive athlete, I guess, growing up, I always think in terms of training. And how do companies get trained? I think the way companies get trained is by their customers. For the customers say, I like that sort of, but not all that much, and I'm starting to like that guy's stuff more than yours, and that's the same as going to the the weight room or running laps or running stairs. You get trained daily by your customers to do better, right? And the thing that monopolists end up being damaged by is the lack of training that comes when the customers don't have a voice. So when you're a total monopoly, right, you don't have a voice when you go to the Department of Motor Vehicles to get your license renewed, right? Yeah. They take as long as they damn well please, because if you want to drive a car, that is your only route to getting a license. They don't have to listen to you, and when they don't have to listen to you, they stop getting trained on how to be better and better and better. And so what monopolists have to do, or companies approaching monopoly have to do, is say, how am I going to get trained? And honestly, the best way to get trained is to have strong competition, like really strong competition that you actually have to take seriously. And I looked at companies that have been Dow Jones 30 members for the longest time, and virtually all of them have always enjoyed a head-to-head, really tough competitor. And so I would just say that for Google, who's going to train you if your customers have no choice? And I mean, it may be a sore point, but don't do things that take choice away from your customers. If you use AdSense, you can't use any of our competitors, Europe, EU, right? That will train you less. You need to keep on being trained. You may be the greatest company in your industry by far, but that doesn't mean you don't need to work out. And so keep putting yourself in a position where you are forced to work out every day, and you will be better for longer than would otherwise be the case.
Thank you, Roger. We have a few more questions here, but unfortunately we are out of time. So before we end, I'd just like to tell the audience that When More Is Not Better is now available on Amazon in hardcover, ebook, and audiobook. So with that, Roger, thank you so much. I thank you on behalf of all the Googlers for sharing your knowledge and wisdom with us. And I really hope that many Googlers were inspired today as much as I was, to take action, even if it's a small one, towards saving our magical democratic capitalism. Thank you.
And thanks for taking the time, and thanks for doing such a nice job.
Thanks, Roger. Thank you, everyone.